Every ghost has an origin story. The shy groom, the skeletal bride, the jazzy underworld. Tim Burton's Corpse Bride is a modern Gothic classic. But the story you know is a beautiful lie. Because Emily isn't a character from a fairy tale, and her story was never meant to be a romance. We are digging up the grave of this familiar story and uncovering the secret identity of the Corpse Bride. First, let's return to the story we all know, Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. In a dreary Victorian town, a nervous young man named Victor practices vows for an arranged marriage he barely understands. Fleeing into the woods after a disastrous rehearsal, he finally speaks them flawlessly, sliding the ring onto what he thinks is a root. But it isn't a root. A blue skeletal hand closes around the ring. From the soil rises Emily, a bride murdered on her wedding night and buried with her dreams. She drags Victor into the land of the dead, a place bursting with color, music, and memory, and tells him her story, the lover who betrayed her, the jewels, the ambush in the forest. Victor is now trapped between two worlds and two brides. But something about Emily stands out. She isn't consumed by revenge. She's consumed by the promise. The words of the vow are what reanimated her. And that legalistic focus is our first clue. To understand that clue, we have to dig deeper. What you might not know is that Tim Burton's film is an adaptation of a much older, darker piece of European folklore. The story comes from a 19th century Russian Jewish folktale, preserved by folklorists like Howard Schwartz. It was actually born as a legal and spiritual horror story. The tale begins not with one man, but with a group of young Jewish men traveling together through the countryside. They are on their way to a neighboring village, a shtetl, for the wedding of their friend. As they journey, they stop to rest in a field. The young groom-to-be, full of excitement and youthful bravado, decides to rehearse the wedding ceremony. He takes out the sacred wedding ring and looks for a place to put it. He spots something sticking out of the ground. It looks like a stick, or perhaps a finger. Amused, he and his friends gather around as he places the ring on the object and recites the ancient binding Hebrew vow. "Behold, you are consecrated to me with this ring, according to the law of Moses and Israel." The moment the vow is spoken, his friends' laughter dies. The ground trembles, and the finger curls, trapping the ring. Before their horrified eyes, a corpse, dressed in the tattered remains of a wedding gown, claws its way out of the earth. She silently points a skeletal finger at the young man. He is her husband. She follows them. A silent, relentless specter of death, she accompanies the wedding party into the village. When the groom arrives to meet his living fiancée, the dead bride is there, waiting. A crisis erupts. According to the holy laws of their community, the vow was real. It was spoken correctly. There was a witness, in this case, the dead bride herself. The young man is now impossibly married to two women. One living, one dead. It's a chilling story, but can you already feel how different its soul is from the film we know? The conflict is brought before a council of rabbis. Instead of being resolved with a dramatic chase or a change of heart, the entire community, living and dead, is locked in a supernatural court case. The rabbis must consult ancient legal texts and spiritual traditions to decide the fate of these three souls. You join our own community of curious souls when you subscribe. Now, let's place the film and the folktale side by side. These differences are our next clues. First, the most obvious clue, the cultural context. Tim Burton sets his story in a vaguely Christian Victorian world, but the original story is explicitly, undeniably Jewish. It is rooted in the life, language, and laws of the shtetls of Eastern Europe. This change amounts to far more than a different setting. Removing the story's Jewishness fundamentally erases its very identity. Second, look at the vow itself. In the film, Victor's promise is enchanting, a piece of accidental magic. In the folktale, it is a legally binding contract. The story transforms a romantic promise into a binding legal covenant rooted in halakha, Jewish religious law. But the final clue is the most important one. In Burton's film, the corpse bride has a name, Emily. She has a specific personal backstory. We know who she was, who killed her, and why. The corpse bride of the original folktale, however, is completely anonymous. She has no name, no backstory, no individual identity at all. She isn't presented as a person so much as an archetype. But an archetype of what? To find the secret identity of the corpse bride, we can't look in a book of folklore. We have to look in the blood-soaked pages of history. Our investigation now takes us to the Russian Empire of the 19th and early 20th centuries. For the Jewish people living there, this was a time of intense persecution. By law, most were confined to a western territory called the Pale of Settlement, where they lived in constant uncertainty, often in small, tightly knit market towns called shtetls. Their existence was precarious, their rights few, and their safety almost non-existent. And that is because of a word that still echoes with dread: pogrom. To be clear, a pogrom was not just a riot, but a state-tolerated wave of anti-Semitic violence that destroyed Jewish communities. Mobs would descend on a shtetl, looting homes, burning businesses and synagogues, and murdering Jewish people in the streets. And the most monstrous expression of that cruelty was the deliberate targeting of joy. Pogroms were frequently timed to coincide with Jewish holidays or moments of communal celebration. And the ultimate celebration was a wedding. Historians and survivor testimonies from the period describe a horrific recurring tactic. A mob of attackers would learn of a wedding taking place in a shtetl. They waited until the ceremony was underway, then struck, attacking the wedding party, murdering the groom, the family, and the guests. And very often, the bride herself would be assaulted and killed in her wedding gown. Her dreams of a future turned to ashes in an instant. Now, think back to the folktale. These murdered brides, victims of such profound hatred, were often buried without proper ceremony. They were interred hastily in the chaos, sometimes in mass graves, their final resting places unmarked and unknown. The skeletal finger sticking out of the ground suddenly becomes more than a piece of gothic fantasy. It transforms into the literal image of a forgotten victim, a grave that has been lost, a life that has been violently erased from history. The story gives a voice to a woman who was brutally silenced. The anonymous bride in the folktale, the nameless corpse who claws her way out of the earth, represents more than just one person. Her anonymity is her identity. She is the collective ghost of every Jewish bride murdered during a pogrom. She is the embodiment of a stolen future. She is a walking, talking memorial for the forgotten dead. The purpose of this folklore wasn't to scare children. It was created by a traumatized people as a way to process an unimaginable horror. In a world where their lives could be wiped out in an instant and their history actively erased by violence, this story was an act of remembrance. It was a way to ensure that these murdered women, these real-life corpse brides, would never be truly forgotten. The story became their only gravestone. With this devastating truth revealed, we can finally return to our original question. What's the true meaning of the corpse bride's final choice? To understand that, we can re-examine the story's ending, both in the ancient folktale and in Tim Burton's modern masterpiece. The folktale is a story of mourning. It is a cultural ritual, a way for a community to confront the ghosts of its past. In Jewish tradition, there is a special memorial prayer for the dead called the Yizkor. It is recited on holy days to remember loved ones who have passed on. In a way, this entire folktale functions as a form of Yizkor. It forces the living to stop and to remember the dead who were taken unjustly. This becomes crystal clear when we look at the ending of the original tale. The rabbis gather, the case is heard, and the living and the dead both state their claims. After long deliberation, the head rabbi delivers the verdict. The vow made to the dead bride was legitimate, he rules, but the living have priority over the dead. The young man must marry his living fiancée. The community must continue. Life must go on. Upon hearing the verdict, the dead bride lets out a single piercing shriek of sorrow. It is the sound of all the pain, all the loss, and all the injustice she represents. And then she collapses into a pile of bones and dust and is silent forever. This shouldn't be seen as a defeat, however. What it represents is a moment of profound and necessary catharsis. Her scream is not one of anger, but of release. For the first time, her story has been heard. Her tragedy has been formally acknowledged by the leaders of her community. Her claim, even though it was ultimately denied, was treated with the seriousness and respect she was denied in life, and she can at last find peace and set free. Now, let's return to Tim Burton's film. Armed with the secret identity of the corpse bride, her final actions in the film take on a staggering new weight. The ending transforms from a bittersweet moment in a children's movie into a century-old story of trauma and grace. In the film's climax, Victor is prepared to sacrifice his own life to give Emily the marriage she deserves. But just as he is about to do it, Emily stops him. She sees Victoria watching in the shadows. And in that moment, she understands everything. Her words reveal why she chose to die again. She says, "I was a bride. My dreams were taken from me. But now I've stolen them from someone else. I love you, Victor, but you are not mine." This is the answer. In life, her choice was stolen by a man who saw her only as an obstacle to his greed. In death, she is presented with the ultimate test. She has the power to do to Victoria exactly what was done to her. She could inflict the same pain, and no one would blame her. Victor made a promise, and she has every right to claim it. And she refuses. She looks at the cycle of trauma, of dreams taken, of futures stolen, and she chooses to be the one who breaks it. Her final act should be viewed less as tragic self-sacrifice and more as the ultimate act of reclaiming her own power. She is no longer defined by what was done to her. She is defined by what she chooses to do. She transforms herself from vengeance into empathy. Then she watches her murderer, Lord Barkis, meet justice in the underworld. But it is not her victory. Her victory was the choice. The final beautiful image of Emily stepping into the moonlight, her body dissolving into 1,000 blue butterflies, represents her spirit was liberated, finally, on its own terms. She ceases to be just a victim. Stories like this are cultural scar tissue. They protect the wound, but keep its shape. The folktale preserved the memory of trauma long after the facts faded. But what happens when that story travels across oceans and generations? The journey of the corpse bride is a perfect example of a process we could call the Great Sanitization. With each adaptation, its pain and identity were scrubbed away. We fell in love with the ghost, but forgot the real woman. Does knowing this truth ruin the film? I believe it does the exact opposite. It elevates the character of Emily from a tragic heroine into a powerful symbol of historical injustice and ultimate grace. We owe it to Emily and to the real corpse brides of history to finally know their story. We've uncovered the tragedy buried inside a modern fairy tale. But sometimes, the most complex secrets are hidden in the simplest verses. Join me next time as we crack the code of a children's rhyme and I finally explain every hidden theory about Hickory Dickory Dock.